here is they're deeply Catholic, and in a sense, the Catholic Church has become let's say the succor of the nation, that they would, by their faith, would be different, would be protected. They'd have the grace of God for their community, if not their separation. And so the church became almost an alternative authority, of course, versus the British authorities who tread lightly upon Quebec for many, many years. But here's an old Quebec flag which has the Sacré-Cœur and the Christian symbolism. So one of the aspects of Quebec society is it's very religious and very righteous toward just about anybody. And so the bishops and the various prelates of the Catholic Church became, let's say, an alternative form of sovereignty for the Quebecers, Quebecois, versus the Protestant English speakers. So you'll see in Quebec City or Montreal, all the towns and villages of Quebec have very elaborate churches. Just a few of them. This one's in Quebec. This one's also in outside of Quebec City. There are new ones, and so the religious faith is very strong, though it was always competing with, let's say, the outside forces, and then of course the expanse of the great land, and people would go farther and farther away from the mother church sometimes. Now it's becoming a more secular society. Here's the oratory, the great church in Montreal overlooking Montreal. Well, here's the symbol of the city of Quebec, which is, of course, a ship and a fortress, which it harkens to its days as both the commercial center and the military center for New France. And so this brought in, and even after its conquest by the British, it continued to prosper, and now it's a small city in the center, about 500,000 people, but has extensive suburbs and industries outside of it, particularly along the river. So you can see how narrow the river gets right there. That's why it's so strategic. And we'll be coming in past the marinas and different industrial complexes to dock right below the Citadel, and the great Chateau Frontenac will be right at that dock. And from there, they've landfilled it out with a modern terminal and plenty of parking, things like that. But the old lower town, the Ville, is right there along the ramparts of the Citadel. And then you can walk from the dock through the old town and then up into the upper town, though it's a bit of a hike, to say the least. So they do have a funicular. You can see it right there. You can just go down and get a free ride up to this is the Chateau Frontenac, which is the great, actually it's a hotel. It's not a medieval castle. It's its own creation from a while ago. So you have Vieux Quebec, the Vieux part, and then the Haute Ville, which is the upper town with a grid streets and then offices and neighborhoods, a lot of restaurants, a lot of things right up there. So you can get around fairly easily on foot. Montreal, by contrast, is a far broader spread out city. But we'll be coming in where there's a marina with the boats. This picture shows the New France old flag. So it is the French flag with the yellow star. You see that occasionally around as a sort of francophone patriotic flag. And this is the old town down on the river of Quebec. So they've kept and preserved a lot of the old buildings there. Now there are shops and restaurants and things. So you can walk around there readily and enjoy the flavor of New France, along with some modern sculptures. So particularly this tremendous architecture with its steep roofs, that's particularly adapted to the heavy snowfall they get here. And this is the great Chateau Frontenac, named after that governor back in the 1600s. Now this was built as a key hotel for the great Canadian Pacific Railroad, which had steamships and the Transcontinental Railroad that then built all the way out to Vancouver. And if you've ever taken that train, it's one of the great train rides across the continent. But above all, they made these tremendous hotels, like this one is the most famous of them, and along with the ones in Alberta and out in British Columbia and all along the railroad. So this was in the days before airplanes and automania. people would actually get on a luxury train and go stay at these luxury hotels and get the grand tour of Canada. And it's still there. You go through, there's all kinds of things in that complex. And right above it is the Citadel, which is the military fort that had been taken by the assault of the British, and then it remained a Canadian military fort until just recently, where it has been now converted into a historic park and overlook over the whole area on the Terrasse du Ferrin. There are other fortresses down the river and further in. This is Fort Chambly, which was built by the French to defend against the invasion coming up from Lake Champlain in New York State, and that's still there on the Richelieu Canal. And this is the only French fort that remained in action, let's say, after the British victory, because then it was the staging point for the resistance to the American invasion in 1813, which was part of the War of 1812. But when the Quebec and British forces repulsed the militia and U.S. Army that were trying to take Montreal in particular, that led to the British Navy coming around and burning Washington, D.C., and that, again, a misunderstanding. All these wars should never have happened, but they make for good paintings. Anyway, I'm going to move on to Montreal now, because this was the city where everybody met. Say Quebec is staunchly and proudly just French, but Montreal was the place where traders from all in the continent, particularly from the west and the rivers systems, would come to trade. That was the place where you could do more business, and it, from its founding, was meant to be, let's say, a cooperative commercial center. So their city flag actually has the Cross of St. George, the English flag, plus the fleur-de-lis and the Scott thistle and the Irish shamrock and the English rose there. And to this day, it is a mixed city. It's the largest city, about 2 million people in the whole town, and it has extended suburbs all along the different banks of the Isle of Laval and the St. Lawrence River. Now, this is where the river traditionally was at the head of navigation. So any ocean-going ship could only come to this particular port, and then everything else had to go by canoe. Here's the old description of it. Now, that isle has now been, of course, urbanized all over it, but right above it there are rapids and impassable rivers originally. So Montreal became the largest commercial outlet for the bounty of the interior, particularly fur. That was the big trade, and the voyageur canoeists would come in and they would offload and they'd do their business in Montreal. Now, the town itself, it's called the Royal Mountain, named after the King Louis XIV of France, and that mountain is still there. And it was a landmark of the city, and to this day it's a park. But this city grew quickly and was under, let's say, the British North America rule, the major city. Now, Toronto, let's say, has taken that position more so as a major commercial city. They're, let's say, sister cities, and but Montreal was certainly the first of the major commercial cities of Canada, because from there they built canals that went around the worst of the rapids so that they extended navigation further up. The old Lachine Canal is still there in central downtown Montreal, but now it's, of course, surpassed by the St. Lawrence Seaway, which I talked about yesterday. Again, the British Army came in and demanded the surrender of Montreal in 1760. Quebec, the major political center, had already fallen, and so there was no fighting in Montreal. It was a peaceful surrender. Then, when the American Revolution happened, many of the Montrealers thought that if they would join with the rebels in the English colonies, they would be free of the British at that point. So this is right in Old Town by the waterfront in Montreal, the house of Pierre de Calvet, who was a merchant, French-speaking merchant, who welcomed the Americans when they came and suddenly took for a few months Montreal and held it against the British, but were finally driven out. And Mr. Calvet, he was imprisoned thereafter for being a collaborator with those American rebels. So this is the mix of history that you can appreciate, maybe. Well, meanwhile, Montreal, the old town, is again very French. And so here's the city hall, the Hôtel de Ville, and there are a lot of monuments to French heroes, and they maintain their, let's say, glorious past into the present. This is the founder of the city of Montreal, Paul Champigny de Maisonneuve. He was a nobleman, came all the way up after Champlain and after the others. He came and he felt that Montreal was going to be the major city, and so he's the founding father. And in the old town right by the dock, again, you walk out from the terminal. Montreal just is a much bigger city and spread out, but they have kept some of the old buildings and have carriage rides and lots of cafes, and it's a particularly this time of year, a very pleasant city. It has a lot of the mountain park and a lot of lakes, and it's a sort of a much broader city, and has now, of course, built a new downtown of big glass boxes. So that's the hill of Mount Royal or Montreal, right there on the right, and the rest of the city and many, many neighborhoods. So it's a big town, particularly compared to Quebec, but it's been built quite pleasantly, let's say, so it has plenty of green space and open space. And then, of course, in the winter, it chills over. Now, back before, let's say, high skyscrapers invaded, it was a big city, but the highest buildings are always the churches back then. Now they are shadowed by modern architecture. I have to say, after being in many of these cities, they all look the same now with their big boxes. But we will be right on the waterfront there on the dock, and then you see the Cathedral of Montreal is the dome building right there now on the waterfront relative to the rest of the city. But uptown into the business district, you have the Avenue Sainte-Catherine is a major entertainment center, and you can get around town fairly easily. It's bigger than most walking will get you there, but I believe there are tours and places before we all go off back to our homes, as this is our disembarkation. But Montreal strives to be the most modern place, of course, and so what it has is a lot of high-tech industries. For instance, Bombardier, the aircraft builder, BlackBerry, the phone manufacturer, a lot of scientific and technological headquarters are in Montreal, and so it becomes, let's say, the end of business here. You get there to enjoy the city, but it's mostly a business center. And I was just up there for some business the other in the winter, and it's so busy in the winter. I think people just take the summer off and go off into the wider country, but in the winter it's a very industrious city. And they're also famous for hosting the Olympics in 1976, and also the Expo in 1967. Some of our guests said they went there for that. And this is the remains of the U.S. exhibit of the biosphere. It's an example of, let's say, forward thinking. Though some of the Montrealers and Quebecois will complain that they have just now finished paying off the construction bonds for the Expo and the Olympics, and most of the facilities are sit empty. So that's the Olympic problem, let's say, of construction and then abandonment. Now they're all part of parks, and they have some activities. But I'll just also emphasize that Quebec, for all of its history, is also trying to be a sort of a leading-edge scientific, technological part of the world and part of the global economy. This is the world's, North America's largest astronomical observatory, which is linked in with all the universities and other planet observatories around the world now. This is up on the Laurentians above Montreal. Gatineau is another city just beyond Montreal, which has, again, scientific research centers. And this is where Quebec tries to be as innovative as it can, because otherwise it will be left behind. But part of this is a linguistic competition. When I was there last year, I met a student from, I believe he was Italian, but he came to study in Quebec because he could speak French, because he didn't want to go to an English university. Of course, now this is very competitive with Ontario, much less the rest of the North America. But this referendum of whether Quebec will become independent is always rearing its head, and even I was reading the Montreal papers today. Now they have a group of English speakers for independence. So they call anglophones for indépendance. Well, this has become such an argument that it's not unlike some other countries that have political arguments, but this yearning for independence has always been tempered by, well, what are the real consequences of it? Sort of like Brexit or other problems like this, where you ideologically you think that's a great idea, but then the consequences are unknown. So this is a protest to say no to the independence. And note the flag with the Native American, or the First Nation as they call it here, non mes amis and such, so that even if they are proud to be Francophone or Quebecois, they understand that breaking up with the Federation of Canada will throw up borders and duties and renegotiate everything and such, that Quebec will not be prosperous as it is now if they take the political step of independence from Canada, much less the consequences on Canada. So here's just a chart of Quebec business with the rest of the world, the majority of which is with the other Canadian provinces, of course. But a large part is with the United States, and as you know, the border has parallel states and provinces that the majority of their business is done trans-border. Now, just for the international trade, for Quebec, 87% of its international trade is over the U.S. border. And so this is sort of the sobering economic reality of independence movement, that they've never been able to convince their own people that this would be a good move, because largely the economic and business community does not want this to happen because of the global interdependence, and particularly the interdependence between provinces and with the United States. And a prime example of this is Hydro-Quebec, the great electrical generation enterprise, state-owned in Quebec. The primary industry of the government of Quebec is to build dams and provide electricity for not just Quebec, but also other parts of Canada. But their major client and purchaser of electricity is New England and New York State. And so this particular reservoir, which is up the Manicoaugan River into Cree territory, is the largest of the reservoirs. And again, in the news just today, they're raising the level of it because they have water coming in. But what that does is it floods even more territory. And the Cree Nation has gone to the United Nations to protest Hydro-Quebec's flooding of their villages. Now, this is a classic problem with the natives. But Hydro-Quebec, when the debate goes on, they have plenty of electricity at a bargain rate in Montreal, Quebec, et cetera. But there was a negotiation between New York State Power Authority and Hydro-Quebec, and the New York State said, if you declare independence from Canada, then we have to renegotiate our deal, which probably would not be as good. So that was one of the political pressures put upon the Quebec government to, let's say, keep the status quo and develop as it is without being independent in name. So Montreal has let's say, plenty of electricity in the winter and for all of its nightlife for which it's famous. And then its entertainment industry is also fairly famous around the world, the lead singer being Celine Dion. And then you might have also gone to see Cirque du Soleil, the Sun Circus of Montreal, which is a now world-famous touring company. And it's made of human tricks, no animal tricks. So it's quite a remarkable production. You may see it in Las Vegas or on tour in wherever you are. But this is sort of an example of the spirit of Quebec and Montreal. They have a lot of street festivals and theater and literature and film industry and such that it's very local. And so you may see some of this when we're there. And you may also have the local fine cuisine. Now, of course, they have a lot of fine French restaurants, but if you ever had poutine, which is the Quebec, let's say, fast foods like a macaroni and cheese, it's fried potatoes with cheese and anything else, sausage and whatever else you want to put on it. But it's truly a delicious gooey mess. So if you would like some of the exotic cuisine, it's on the street stands and small shops all through Quebec and Montreal. Well, the people of Quebec are famously lively and argumentative and exuberant, and particularly in the arts. And so they don't know if we have anything happening the day that we're there, but there's a lot of street life and cafes and sort of joie de vivre, which is the least they could do. So then the question is, what do they teach the children? all this history, for better and for worse, or how to manage the future. And that's, of course, a question for all of us everywhere. And I hope you find your visit to Quebec and Montreal interesting, and perhaps you can get a flavor that this is a very special part of North America and Canada. And with that, I just say bienvenue à Quebec, and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much.